r/ProRevenge landlord called CPS after Thanksgiving, so I got him evicted. The knock on my door at 8:47 a.m. on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving wasn't the maintenance guy I'd been expecting. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a beige coat holding a clipboard and a man in a rumpled suit standing behind her, both wearing the kind of serious expressions that make your stomach drop to your knees. Ms. Rodriguez? I'm Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Mr. Williams. We need to speak with you about your daughter. My hands went numb as I fumbled with the deadbolt. CPS. At my door. About Emma. I'm sorry, what is this about? I managed to ask, stepping aside as they entered my small living room. Emma was at school, thank God, but our breakfast dishes were still on the counter and her toys were scattered across the carpet from our morning routine. Ms. Chen consulted her clipboard. We received a report alleging neglect and unsafe living conditions for a minor child residing at this address. The caller claimed the child was living in squalor, frequently left unattended, and showed signs of malnourishment. The words hit me like physical blows. That's absolutely not true. Emma is healthy and well cared for. She's never left alone. I don't understand, who would say something like that? But even as the question left my mouth, I knew. My landlord, Rick Morrison. The man who'd shown up drunk at my door 4 days ago to collect rent and made it clear he expected more than the $1,200 I owed him. The man whose wandering hands I'd firmly pushed away before slamming the door in his face. Mr. Williams was already walking through my apartment, peering into the kitchen, checking the locks on the windows. Ma'am, we need to conduct a thorough inspection of the premises and interview you about your daughter's care. I watched helplessly as they documented everything, the small water stain on the ceiling from the upstairs neighbor's broken pipe, the space heater I used because Rick refused to fix the heating system, the dead roach I'd missed behind the refrigerator. Normal apartment issues that suddenly looked sinister through their investigative lens. Ms. Rodriguez, can you tell us about your work schedule? Ms. Chen asked, settling onto my second-hand couch with her pen poised. I work part-time at Henderson Elementary as a teacher's aide, and I clean offices 3 evenings a week. Emma comes with me to the school job, and my neighbor Mrs. Patterson watches her when I do the cleaning. My voice sounded thin and defensive even to my own ears. For the next hour, they grilled me about Emma's meals, her doctor visits, her school attendance, our daily routine. They took photos of her room, our refrigerator contents, the bathroom. They made notes about everything, turning my home into evidence of crimes I hadn't committed. We'll need to interview your daughter as well, Ms. Chen said as they prepared to leave. Someone will be contacting her school today. After they left, I sat on my couch shaking with rage and terror. Emma was the most important thing in my world, the reason I worked 2 jobs, the reason I stayed in this overpriced apartment in a decent school district, the reason I got up every morning and kept fighting. And Rick Morrison had weaponized the system against us because I wouldn't let him touch me. He'd made a mistake though. He thought I was just another desperate single mom with no options and no fight left. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I couldn't concentrate on anything for the rest of the day. Every few minutes, I'd grab my phone to call Emma's school, then stop myself. What was I going to say? Hi, CPS is coming to interrogate my 6-year-old. Please make sure she knows mommy isn't a bad person. At 2:30, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's school number. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Principal Martinez. Emma is fine, but we did have some visitors today from Child Protective Services. They spoke with her for about 20 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs. How did she seem? Confused, mostly. She kept asking if she was in trouble. The social worker asked her about home, about food, about whether she's ever left alone. Emma answered all their questions, but she was pretty upset afterward. She's asking for you. I closed my eyes. I'm coming to get her. Actually, Ms. Rodriguez, there's something else. The social worker mentioned that Emma shouldn't be removed from her current environment until their investigation is complete. They want to maintain her routine. The subtext was clear, don't run. Don't disappear with your child. We're watching you now. When I picked Emma up at the usual time, she ran to me like she always did, but I could see the worry in her dark eyes, worry that no 6-year-old should have to carry. Mommy, why did those people want to talk to me? The lady asked if you give me food and if you leave me by myself. I told her you make me breakfast every day and you never leave me alone, but she kept writing stuff down. I knelt to her level, forcing my voice to stay calm. Some people just need to make sure all kids are safe and happy. You didn't do anything wrong, and neither did I. Sometimes adults have to answer questions, that's all. But Emma wasn't stupid. At 6, she'd already learned to read the tension in a room, to pick up on the things adults didn't say. Are they going to take me away? The question nearly broke me. No, baby. I promise you, that is never going to happen. It was a promise I desperately hoped I could keep. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started researching. If Rick wanted to play dirty, I needed to understand the game. I learned that CPS investigations could take weeks or months. That they could remove children from homes based on immediate danger assessments. That false reporting was technically illegal, but rarely prosecuted. That landlords held an enormous amount of power over tenants, especially single mothers with limited resources. But I also learned other things. I learned that rental properties required specific permits and inspections. That landlords had legal obligations for habitability. That housing codes existed for a reason, and violations carried serious penalties. I pulled up the city's property records for my building. Rick Morrison owned 17 properties across town, a decent-sized slumlord operation. I started a spreadsheet, documenting each address. Then I called my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who watched Emma for me. Honey, I heard about those people coming by today, she said before I could even explain. That man has some nerve. You know he tried the same thing with the girl in 3B last year? My blood went cold. What do you mean? Same story. Rent collection turned into hands where they shouldn't be. When she rejected him, suddenly she was getting noise complaints, threats about lease violations. She moved out last month, said she couldn't take the harassment anymore. I gripped the phone tighter. Mrs. Patterson, would you be willing to make a statement about what you've seen? About his behavior? Child, I'd testify in court if it meant protecting you and that sweet baby. After we hung up, I stared at my laptop screen. Rick had a pattern. He was a predator who used his position to target vulnerable women, and when they refused him, he made their lives hell. But predators get sloppy when they think they're untouchable. Time to prove him wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my door. Lease violation warning was printed in bold red letters across the top. Asterisk tenant has violated lease terms by excessive noise complaints, unauthorized occupancy verification required, failure to maintain sanitary conditions. Tenant has 72 hours to remedy violations or face eviction proceedings. Asterisk. My hands shook as I read it. Every single claim was fabricated. We were quiet as mice. Emma was in bed by 8 every night and we barely owned a TV loud enough to disturb anyone. Unauthorized occupancy? It was just me and Emma, same as it had been for 2 years. And our apartment was spotless. I'd made sure of that after the CPS visit. But I knew exactly what this was. Rick was building a paper trail to support his false CPS report. If he could get us evicted for lease violations, it would make me look unstable, make it seem like I couldn't provide proper housing for Emma. I took photos of the notice and added them to a new folder on my laptop, Rick Morrison Evidence. At work that day, I couldn't focus on helping Mrs. Coleman's second graders with their math worksheets. Every time my phone buzzed, I panicked that it was CPS calling with more questions, or Emma's school reporting another visit. During my lunch break, I drove to the courthouse and pulled property records for all 17 of Rick's buildings. What I found made my pulse quicken. Building permits filed for properties that showed different unit counts than what he was actually renting. Business licenses that had expired 2 years ago. Properties listed as single-family homes that had clearly been subdivided into multiple apartments. I photographed everything and drove to the first address on my list, 847 Maple Street, listed in city records as a single-family dwelling. But the building had 4 separate mailboxes, 4 separate entrances, and I could see multiple electrical meters on the side. I knocked on the first floor door. A young woman answered, bouncing a crying baby on her hip. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm trying to get some information about your landlord, Rick Morrison. Has he been responsive to maintenance requests? Her laugh was bitter. You must be new. Rick doesn't fix anything unless you threaten him with lawyers. My heat's been broken for 3 weeks, and there's black mold growing in the bathroom that he says is my fault for creating moisture. Can I ask, do you know if this building has proper permits for multiple units? She shifted the baby to her other hip. Lady, nothing about this place is proper. The electrical is a nightmare, the fire escape doesn't meet code, and I'm pretty sure that's not legal insulation in the walls. But where else am I gonna go that I can afford? It was the same story at the next building, and the next. Rick Morrison was running a textbook slumlord operation, illegal conversions, no permits, deferred maintenance, and vulnerable tenants who couldn't afford to complain. But more importantly, every tenant I talked to was living in conditions that violated multiple housing codes. Conditions that put children at risk, real risk, not the fabricated concerns he'd reported about Emma and me. At my evening cleaning job, I used the office computer to dig deeper. I found the contact information for the city's Housing Code Enforcement Division, the Fire Department's Inspection Unit, and the Zoning Compliance Office. Rick wanted to play the concerned citizen reporting child endangerment? Let's see how he felt when real authorities started examining his properties. I started writing my first report at 11 p.m., documenting every code violation I'd photographed at 847 Maple Street. Illegal unit conversion. Inadequate fire safety measures. Electrical hazards. Failure to maintain habitable conditions. I wrote separate reports for each building, each violation, each safety hazard I documented. By 2 a.m., I had 17 detailed complaints ready to file with 3 different city departments. Rick Morrison thought he could destroy my life because I wouldn't submit to him. He thought he held all the cards. He was about to discover that I'd been studying the deck. The next morning, I hit send on all 17 reports before Emma even woke up. My finger hovered over the submit button for each one, but then I thought about that notice on my door, about Emma's confused face when she asked if those people were going to take her away, and I clicked without hesitation. Within 2 hours, my phone rang. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Detective Amanda Foster with the police department. We received your reports about potential housing violations, and I wanted to follow up on some of the details you provided. My stomach clenched. Is there a problem with my reports? Not at all. Actually, we've been building a file on Mr. Morrison for some time. Your documentation is quite thorough. I'm wondering if you'd be available to meet this afternoon? I arranged to meet Detective Foster during my lunch break, but first I had a more immediate problem. At 10 a.m., Rick showed up at my door again, this time with a man I didn't recognize carrying a clipboard. Inspection, Rick announced, pushing past me into the apartment. City requires verification of living conditions following certain reports. I knew this wasn't a real city inspection. I'd researched the process thoroughly the night before. Real inspectors had identification, advance notice requirements, and official vehicles. This was Rick's friend, probably another landlord, helping him manufacture evidence. I need to see your credentials, I said, blocking the fake inspector's path to Emma's room. Lady, don't make this difficult, Rick said, his voice carrying that same threatening undertone from Thanksgiving night. You're already in enough trouble. Cooperate, and maybe things won't get worse for you. The fake inspector was taking photos anyway, focusing on every minor flaw, a scuff mark on the wall, dust on a base plate, the space heater I needed because Rick wouldn't fix the heating. I realized he was building a visual record to support whatever false narrative they wanted to create. Get out, I said firmly. Both of you. Now. Rick stepped closer, and I could smell stale alcohol on his breath even at 10 a.m. You think you're smart, don't you? Filing your little complaints, causing problems. You have no idea what kind of trouble you're asking for. Are you threatening me? Because I'm recording this conversation. I held up my phone, which had been recording since the moment he'd pushed into my apartment. His face darkened, but he backed toward the door. 72 hours, Maria. Fix those violations or you're out. And when CPS sees you can't even maintain stable housing. He didn't finish the sentence, just smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. After they left, I immediately called Detective Foster and moved our meeting up to noon. She met me at a coffee shop near the courthouse, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She spread Rick's property photos across our small table like evidence cards. How long has he been harassing you? She asked without preamble. I told her everything, the inappropriate advances, the false CPS report, this morning's fake inspection. She took notes and asked for copies of my photos and recordings. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be straight with you. Housing violations are civil matters, and they move slowly. Rick Morrison has been operating like this for years because he knows how to work the system. But what you've documented here. She tapped the photos. This might be enough for criminal charges. Building code violations that endanger lives, fraud in rental licensing, possibly racketeering if we can prove a pattern of intimidation. How long do these things take? Weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, he's going to escalate his harassment. Men like Morrison don't back down when challenged, they double down. As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop causing trouble or your daughter will pay the price. Detective Foster saw my face go white as I read it. Forward that to me immediately. And Ms. Rodriguez? Document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every contact. We're going to need it all. Walking back to work, I realized Rick had made another crucial mistake. He just threatened Emma directly, in writing. Game on. That evening, I was helping Emma with her homework when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's school again, and my stomach immediately nodded. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Principal Martinez. I'm afraid we have a situation. Mr. Morrison came to the school today claiming to be conducting a welfare check on Emma. He said he was working with CPS and needed to verify her attendance and academic performance. My blood turned to ice. Please tell me you didn't let him near her. Of course not. We have strict protocols. But he was very insistent, and he seemed to have specific information about the CPS investigation. He knew details that made our secretary think he might be legitimate until I intervened. I closed my eyes, fighting down panic. Rick was escalating exactly like Detective Foster had predicted. What did you tell him? I asked for his credentials. When he couldn't produce proper identification, I informed him that all inquiries needed to go through official channels. He became quite agitated and made some concerning comments about Emma's unstable home environment before leaving. What kind of comments? Principal Martinez paused. Ms. Rodriguez, I've known you and Emma for 2 years. She's one of our best students, always clean, well-fed, and happy. Whatever this man is claiming, it doesn't match the child we see every day. I wanted you to know that I've documented this incident and reported his unauthorized visit to the district office. After I hung up, Emma looked up from her math worksheet with worried eyes. Mommy, why do people keep asking about me at school? I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. Remember how I told you sometimes adults have to answer questions to make sure kids are safe? Well, sometimes people ask the wrong questions or they don't understand the real situation. Is it because of the mean man who came here on Thanksgiving? My heart stopped. Emma had been in her room when Rick made his drunken pass at me, but apparently she'd heard more than I realized. What do you remember about that day, sweetheart? He was talking loud and you sounded scared. Then you told him to leave and he said bad words. I heard him say he was going to make you sorry. She looked down at her worksheet. Did he call those people because you made him leave? The clarity of her 6-year-old perception both amazed and heartbroken me. Sometimes when people get angry, they try to cause problems for others. But that's not your fault, and it's not something you need to worry about, okay? But even as I said it, I knew she was already worrying. How could she not be? Her normal routine had been shattered by strangers asking invasive questions, and now those strangers were following her to school. That night, after Emma was asleep, I called Detective Foster and reported Rick's school visit. She sounded grim when I told her about his detailed knowledge of the CPS case. He shouldn't have access to that information unless he has contacts inside the system, she said. That's concerning on multiple levels. I'm going to make some calls. Detective, how long before the housing violations investigation produces results? He's getting bolder, and I'm scared he's going to do something that actually puts Emma in danger. The wheels are already turning faster than usual. Your documentation was so thorough that 3 different departments opened cases immediately. But Morrison doesn't know that yet, which makes him dangerous. 20 minutes after we hung up, someone started pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Rick swaying slightly, clearly drunk again. Behind him stood 2 men I didn't recognize, both looking like they'd stepped out of a casting call for generic thugs. Maria. Open up. We need to talk. His voice was loud enough to wake the neighbors. I grabbed my phone and started recording, then called out, "It's after 10 p.m. and you're disturbing other tenants. Leave immediately or I'm calling the police." "You think you're so smart with your little reports," he slurred. "You think you can cause problems for me? Lady, I own this building. I own you. And if you don't stop this nonsense, you're going to find out what real problems look like." One of his companions stepped forward. "Rick, maybe we should." "No. She needs to understand her place." I tried to be nice, tried to work something out with her, but she wants to be difficult. Emma's door creaked open behind me. She stood in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy? Why is someone yelling?" The sound of her voice made Rick go quiet for a moment, and in that silence, I realized how far this had already gone. He was drunk, angry, and had brought backup. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this felt like a threat of actual violence. "Go back to bed, baby," I whispered to Emma, but she stayed frozen in her doorway. Rick started pounding again. "I know you're recording this. You think that scares me? I have friends too, Maria. Friends in the right places. Your little investigation isn't going anywhere." I dialed 911. The police took 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes of Rick and his friends pounding on my door, shouting threats, and waking up half the building. By the time I heard sirens, Emma was curled up on my bed shaking, and Mrs. Patterson had called twice to check if we were okay. When the officers finally knocked, Rick and his buddies had vanished like cockroaches when the lights come on. "Ma'am, we need to file a report, but without witnesses or physical evidence of threats, there's not much we can charge them with," Officer Davis explained while his partner took notes. "Disturbing the peace, maybe trespassing, but they'll be out in a few hours." I showed them my recording, but the audio was muffled through the door. Rick had been smart enough not to make specific enough threats that would stick in court. The thing is, Officer Davis continued, your landlord has a right to visit his property for legitimate reasons. Unless you can prove he was here to intimidate you specifically. He brought 2 men with him at 10 p.m. to discuss housing violations? I said, hearing the desperation creep into my voice. I understand your frustration, but legally, it's he said she said. After they left, I sat on my couch feeling defeated. Rick was right, he did have friends in the right places. The police response had been deliberately slow, and their investigation was perfunctory at best. How many times had he done this before? How many other women had he terrorized into submission? But at 6 a.m., my phone rang with a call that changed everything. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Inspector Janet Walsh with City Housing Code Enforcement. We conducted a surprise inspection of 847 Maple Street yesterday based on your complaint. I need to inform you that we've issued an immediate occupancy suspension for safety violations. I sat up straighter. What kind of violations? Illegal electrical modifications that pose fire and electrocution hazards, structural modifications that compromise building integrity, and inadequate fire egress that violates safety codes. We're requiring immediate tenant relocation until repairs are completed. My heart started racing. What does that mean for the landlord? Mr. Morrison is facing substantial fines and will need to bring the property into compliance before tenants can return. We're also expanding our investigation to his other properties based on the pattern you documented. 1 down, 16 to go. At 7 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Detective Foster. Morrison just called in a complaint against you, she said without preamble. Claims you're harassing his tenants and filing false reports to city agencies. My stomach dropped. What happens now? Nothing immediately, but it shows he's feeling pressure. Which means he's going to get more desperate. She paused. There's something else. I ran his background. Rick Morrison has 2 prior complaints for sexual harassment from tenants, both cases dismissed due to insufficient evidence. There's also a restraining order filed against him in 2019 by a former tenant named Jessica Chin. The name sounded familiar. Chen, wasn't that the last name of the CPS worker who came to my apartment? Different person, but that's an interesting coincidence. I'm going to look into whether Morrison has any connections inside CPS that might explain how he knew to file a report that would be taken seriously. After Emma left for school, I drove to the address for Jessica Chen from the restraining order. She lived in a small house across town, and when she answered the door, I could see the recognition and fear flash across her face immediately. You're one of Rick's tenants, she said, already starting to close the door. Please, just 5 minutes. He's doing to me what he did to you. She hesitated, then stepped onto her porch instead of inviting me in. I can't get involved. The restraining order expires next month, and if he finds out I'm talking to you. He called CPS on me. Made false claims about my daughter. Jessica's face went pale. Oh God, he's escalating. That's new. Please, anything you can tell me about his pattern, his connections, how he operates. She looked around nervously, then pulled out her phone. I can't talk, but I'm sending you a contact. Sarah Martinez used to work for the housing authority before Rick got her fired. She knows things about his operation that never made it into official reports. My phone buzzed with a number. Be careful, Jessica whispered. Rick doesn't just harass people, he destroys them. He has connections everywhere, and he's not above using them to ruin lives. As I drove home, my phone rang with yet another unknown number. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Supervisor Williams from Child Protective Services. We need to schedule a follow-up visit to your home. There have been additional concerns raised about your daughter's welfare. The bottom fell out of my world. What kind of concerns? I can't discuss details over the phone, but we've received reports about domestic disturbances at your residence, potential drug activity, and concerns about your mental stability. We need to conduct another assessment immediately. I pulled over, hands shaking. Rick wasn't just escalating, he was systematically dismantling my life from every angle. Housing violations against me, harassment complaints to discredit me, and now new false reports to CPS designed to paint me as unstable and dangerous. But he'd made one crucial error. He was moving so fast and filing so many false reports that the pattern was becoming obvious. And patterns, as I was learning, could be used as evidence. I called Detective Foster back. He's accelerating the timeline, I told her. Which means something has him scared. Good, she replied. Scared people make mistakes. That afternoon, I called the number Jessica had given me. Sarah Martinez agreed to meet me at a diner outside the city, away from prying eyes. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the weary look of someone who'd fought the system and lost. When I explained my situation, her expression grew increasingly grim. Rick Morrison destroyed my career, she said quietly, stirring her coffee. I was a senior housing inspector for 12 years. When I started building a case against his illegal conversions, suddenly I was under internal investigation for harassment of property owners and abuse of authority. How did he manage that? Rick's brother-in-law sits on the city council. His golf buddy runs the contractor's licensing board. His ex-wife works in the DA's office. Sarah pulled out a worn manila folder. This is everything I gathered before they forced me out. Property records, tenant complaints, building violations that mysteriously disappeared from official files. I flipped through the documents, my anger building with each page. Rick had been running his illegal operation for over a decade, protected by a network of corrupt officials who looked the other way in exchange for campaign contributions, free renovations on their homes, or simple old boy networking. There's something else, Sarah continued. Rick has a history of targeting single mothers specifically. They're vulnerable, less likely to have resources to fight back, and if they complain too loudly. She gestured to herself. He destroys their support systems. You think he has someone inside CPS? I know he does. Tom Bradley, the supervisor who handles intake reports. Rick's been feeding him information about problem tenants for years. Bradley fast-tracks the investigations and makes sure they're thorough enough to terrify people into compliance. My blood ran cold. The supervisor who'd called me about additional concerns was named Williams, not Bradley, but that didn't mean Rick's influence didn't extend further. What kind of information? Utility disconnection notices that Rick himself causes by forgetting to submit landlord-paid utility transfers. Maintenance requests that he ignores, then reports as evidence of tenants damaging property. Lease violations he manufactures. Sarah leaned forward. Maria, he's been perfecting this system for years. You're not his first victim, you're just the first one who's fought back this hard. When I got home, Emma was waiting with Mrs. Patterson, but something was wrong. My normally chatty daughter was unusually quiet, picking at her after-school snack without her usual enthusiasm. What's wrong, sweetheart? Some kids at school said their parents heard about the police coming to our building. They asked if we're in trouble with the law. Emma's voice was small. I told them no, but then Marcus said his dad works for the city and he heard our landlord is telling people you're a bad mom. Mrs. Patterson looked furious. That man is poisoning the well, spreading rumors to isolate you. It's a classic abuser tactic, destroy your credibility so no one will believe you when you ask for help. But Emma wasn't finished. And Miss Johnson asked me to stay after class today. She wanted to know if I felt safe at home and if anyone had ever hurt me. She was really nice about it, but it felt like when those other people asked questions. My heart sank. Rick's tentacles were reaching into every aspect of our lives. Emma's teacher, who'd known us for 2 years, was now questioning my fitness as a mother based on whatever rumors were circulating. That evening, I was reviewing Sarah's documents when I noticed something that made me stop cold. One of the properties Rick owned was the building where Tom Bradley, the CPS supervisor, lived. According to the lease agreement in the file, Bradley's rent was $400 below market rate. Rick wasn't just bribing officials, he was subsidizing their housing in exchange for their cooperation. It was a systematic corruption network that had been operating for years right under everyone's noses. My phone rang, interrupting my discovery. Unknown number again. Stop digging or your daughter disappears. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, realizing that Rick had just crossed a line from harassment into direct threats against Emma. But he'd also given me exactly what Detective Foster needed. This wasn't just housing violations anymore. This was conspiracy, corruption, and kidnapping threats. And I had it all on record. I called Detective Foster immediately, my hands shaking as I replayed the threatening voicemail for her. The words, your daughter disappears, echoed in my mind like a death sentence. We're moving this to priority status, she said grimly. Death threats against a minor cross federal lines. I'm contacting the FBI task force that handles organized corruption cases. How long will that take? I asked, watching Emma color at the kitchen table, blissfully unaware that someone had just threatened to kidnap her. They'll want to move fast, but building a federal case takes time we might not have. Morrison is spiraling, and desperate men do unpredictable things. As if summoned by her words, my laptop pinged with an email from Rick's property management company, an official eviction notice, citing the fabricated lease violations from earlier in the week. I had 48 hours to vacate or face forcible removal. Detective, he's trying to make me homeless. If I have to move Emma out of her school district, change her routine, lose housing stability, CPS will see it as evidence that you can't provide stable environment for your daughter. I know. Foster's voice was tight with frustration. He's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. After I hung up, I stared at the eviction notice until the words blurred together. Rick was systematically dismantling every aspect of our lives, my housing, my reputation, my relationship with Emma's school, my standing with social services. Each attack was designed to reinforce his false narrative about my unfitness as a mother. But Sarah Martinez's documents were still spread across my table, and suddenly I noticed something I'd missed before. Rick didn't just own Tom Bradley's building, he owned the buildings where 3 other city officials lived, all at below-market rents. The housing code enforcement supervisor who should be investigating his violations. The zoning officer who approved his illegal conversions. Even a clerk in the family court system. Rick Morrison wasn't just a slumlord, he was running a sophisticated corruption ring, trading cheap housing for official protection. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. 2 men were asking about you and Emma at the corner store. Asking what time Emma gets home from school, which route you take to walk her. I told them nothing, but honey, I'm scared. The air left my lungs. Rick wasn't just threatening Emma, he was conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence about our routines. This had moved far beyond harassment into something that felt like active planning. I grabbed Emma and our emergency bag, the one I packed after his first threatening visit. We're having a sleepover at Mrs. Patterson's tonight, I told her, trying to keep my voice light. Why? Is the mean man coming back? The fact that my 6-year-old daughter was already thinking in terms of the mean man broke something inside me. She should be worried about homework and playground drama, not whether dangerous men were coming to our home. Just for fun, sweetheart. Mrs. Patterson wants to make pancakes for breakfast. As we hurried down the hallway with our overnight bag, I noticed the door to 3B, the apartment where Rick's previous victim had lived before moving out, was standing slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see boxes stacked inside and someone moving around. New tenant. Fresh victim. I knocked softly, and a young woman about my age opened the door. She was Latina, probably early 20s, with a toddler clinging to her leg and the exhausted look of a single mother working multiple jobs. Hi, I'm Maria from 2A. I just wanted to welcome you to the building. Her face brightened. Thank you. I'm Sophia. This is my son Miguel. She gestured around the apartment. Still getting settled, but the landlord said he'd have the heat fixed by tomorrow. My stomach dropped. The heat's not working? Just needs some small repair, he said. Mr. Morrison seems really nice, he's been very understanding about my situation. I glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who was standing behind me with Emma. She gave me a meaningful look that said tell her. Sophia, can I give you some advice? Document everything. Every conversation with Rick, every maintenance request, every time he comes to collect rent. Keep records. Her smile faltered slightly. Is there something I should know? Before I could answer, heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Rick's voice carried up from the first floor, talking to someone about keeping an eye on problematic tenants and making sure the new girl understands expectations. I grabbed Sophia's arm gently. My number, I whispered, pressing a piece of paper into her hand. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. We hurried to Mrs. Patterson's apartment, but not before I heard Rick's companion respond, "Don't worry. We know how to handle difficult women." The casual menace in those words made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about me anymore. Rick was already setting his sights on Sophia, already planning to put another single mother through the same nightmare he'd put me through. That night, while Emma slept peacefully in Mrs. Patterson's spare room, I sat at her kitchen table making a decision that would change everything. Rick Morrison thought he was untouchable because he'd spent years building a network of corruption that protected him. He thought he could terrorize vulnerable women with impunity because the system was rigged in his favor. But he'd forgotten something crucial: systems built on corruption are inherently unstable. And when they fall hard. I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would bring his entire empire crashing down. At 3 a.m., I was still awake composing what would essentially be a nuclear bomb disguised as an email. Not to Detective Foster or the FBI, they were moving too slowly through proper channels while Rick escalated his threats daily. No, this was going directly to Channel 7's investigative reporter, Amanda Chin. Yes, Chin. The same last name as the CPS worker who'd first knocked on my door. I'd spent hours cross-referencing names until I found the connection. Sarah Chin from Child Protective Services was Amanda Chin's younger sister. The irony was almost poetic. My email to Amanda was methodical, devastating, and backed by every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Sarah Martinez's documentation of Rick's corruption network. Photos of housing violations across all 17 properties. Audio recordings of his threats. The below-market lease agreements showing city officials living in Rick's properties. Bank records I'd obtained through public information requests showing suspicious patterns of maintenance payments that coincided with dropped investigations. But the centerpiece was the connection between Rick Morrison and Tom Bradley at CPS, a systematic scheme to weaponize child welfare investigations against vulnerable tenants who refused to comply with his demands. I attached everything and hit send at 3:47 a.m. By 6 a.m., my phone was ringing. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Amanda Chen from Channel 7 News. We need to meet immediately. 4 hours later, I was sitting in a downtown coffee shop with one of the city's most respected investigative journalists, watching her flip through printed copies of every document I'd sent. Amanda was sharp, professional, and clearly furious about what she was reading. "This is bigger than one predatory landlord," she said, setting down the photos of Rick's illegal electrical work. "This is systematic municipal corruption. Housing officials taking bribes, CPS supervisors fast-tracking false investigations, city council members looking the other way." She looked up at me. "Do you understand what you've uncovered here? I just wanted to protect my daughter. And you potentially exposed a corruption network that's been operating for over a decade." Amanda pulled out a recorder. "I need you to walk me through everything, starting with Thanksgiving night." For the next 2 hours, I told her the whole story while she took notes and asked pointed questions. She was particularly interested in the timeline, how quickly Rick had moved from sexual harassment to false CPS reports to escalating threats. "We're going to run this story tomorrow night," she said finally. "But I need to warn you, once this airs, there's no going back. Rick Morrison and everyone protecting him will know exactly who brought them down. They already want to destroy me. At least this way, they won't be able to hurt anyone else." Amanda nodded grimly. "I'm also going to recommend that you and Emma stay somewhere safe for the next few days. When cornered rats realize the ship is sinking, they tend to lash out." I was walking back to my car when Detective Foster called, her voice tight with urgency. "Maria, we have a problem. Rick filed a complaint this morning claiming you've been stalking him and his tenants, harassing city officials, and making false reports to multiple agencies. He's painting you as an unstable woman having a breakdown." My hands went numb around the phone. "But the evidence is being reviewed, but he's moving faster than our investigation. He's requesting an emergency custody evaluation for Emma, claiming you're becoming increasingly erratic and paranoid." I stopped walking, leaning against a lamppost for support. Rick wasn't just discrediting me anymore, he was trying to have Emma removed from my care preemptively, before the truth could come out. "There's more," Foster continued. "Tom Bradley at CPS? He's suddenly taken a leave of absence. Effective immediately. And the housing inspector assigned to Rick's properties just transferred to another department. The rats were abandoning ship, covering their tracks, and Rick was making one final desperate play to destroy me before his whole operation collapsed. How long do I have?" "The emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Maria, you need a lawyer. A good one." I hung up and realized Rick had just made his biggest mistake yet. He was so focused on silencing me that he'd forgotten about the bomb I'd already detonated. In 18 hours, Amanda Chen's story would air on the evening news, exposing everything. But first, I had to survive tomorrow's hearing and keep Emma safe. At 7 a.m., I was sitting in a lawyer's office that smelled like stale coffee and desperation, across from Patricia Williams, the only attorney who'd agreed to see me on 12 hours' notice. She was reviewing the emergency custody petition Rick had filed, her expression growing more concerned with each page. "This is professionally crafted," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Someone with legal experience helped him write this. He's citing specific case law, using the right terminology, hitting all the points that family court judges take seriously." My stomach churned as she read Rick's allegations aloud. Petitioner has observed respondent engaging in increasingly erratic behavior including harassment of city officials, stalking of other tenants, paranoid delusions about organized conspiracies, and creation of an unstable living environment that places the minor child at risk. "It's all lies," I said, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded thin and desperate, exactly how Rick wanted me to sound. "I believe you, but look at this from a judge's perspective. You filed multiple complaints against your landlord across several city departments. You've been contacting his other tenants. You've made accusations about corruption involving CPS workers." Patricia set the papers down. Without context, this pattern could look like harassment or paranoid behavior. She was right, and the realization hit me like ice water. Rick had been playing a longer game than I'd understood. Every action I'd taken to gather evidence and protect Emma could be twisted to support his narrative of an unstable mother having a breakdown. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "The petition requests an immediate temporary custody order pending full evaluation. If granted, Emma would be placed in protective custody today." My hands started shaking. "Can they do that?" If the judge believes there's imminent risk, yes. Emergency custody orders can be granted within hours. She leaned forward. Maria, I need you to understand something. Even if we prove Rick is lying, even if his corruption network gets exposed, you could still lose Emma if this hearing goes badly. The irony was devastating. In trying to protect my daughter, I'd given Rick exactly the ammunition he needed to take her away from me. At 10 a.m., I was back at Mrs. Patterson's apartment, staring at Emma as she ate cereal and watched cartoons, blissfully unaware that in 6 hours, a judge would decide whether she could come home with me tonight. The normalcy of the scene, her favorite bowl, her hair in yesterday's braids, her feet swinging under the kitchen chair, felt like a cruel mockery. Mommy, why do you look sad? I forced a smile. Just tired, sweetheart. But Emma had developed an unsettling ability to read my moods. Is it about the mean man again? Before I could answer, Mrs. Patterson's phone rang. She answered it in the kitchen, then came back with a troubled expression. That was Sophia from 3B, she said quietly. Rick paid her a visit this morning. Told her the building was getting cleaned up and she should be careful not to associate with problem tenants like you. He also offered to reduce her rent if she'd be willing to make a statement about your behavior. The manipulation was breathtaking in its efficiency. Rick was simultaneously recruiting Sophia as a character witness against me while setting her up to be his next victim. 2 birds, 1 stone. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen, story ready for tonight's broadcast. Legal team competent in protection against defamation claims. You sure you're ready for this? I looked at Emma, still innocently watching her cartoons, and typed back, broadcast it. At noon, Patricia called with news that made my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. The judge moved our hearing up to 2 p.m., she said. Rick's attorney filed a motion claiming you've been making threats against city officials and they need immediate protection for Emma. We have 2 hours to prepare your defense. What threats? I never threatened anyone. According to their filing, you called the housing department yesterday and told them heads would roll if they didn't investigate your complaints. You allegedly told the CPS supervisor that he'd pay for his crimes. They're characterizing your investigative work as a campaign of intimidation. I closed my eyes, realizing how easily my words could be twisted. I probably had said something about accountability, about consequences for corruption. In context, it was a concerned citizen demanding justice. But stripped of context, presented to a family court judge already primed to see me as unstable. Patricia, what are our chances? The pause before she answered told me everything I needed to know. We're going to fight like hell, she said finally. But Maria, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Emma might not come home with you today. At 1:30 p.m., I was standing outside the family courthouse, watching Emma play on the small playground nearby while Mrs. Patterson supervised her. Emma had no idea this wasn't just another ordinary Tuesday, that her entire future hung in the balance of the next hour. My phone rang one final time before the hearing. Detective Foster. The FBI task force is moving forward, but they can't act until after your hearing. Political sensitivities. Her voice was frustrated. Maria, whatever happens in there, don't let them break you. Amanda Chen's story airs in 5 hours. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know the truth. But as I watched Emma go down the slide, laughing with the pure joy that only 6-year-olds possess, I realized that tomorrow morning might be too late. In 30 minutes, I'd be fighting for my daughter's life in a system that Rick Morrison had spent years learning to manipulate. And I was walking into that courtroom completely alone. I walked into that courtroom at 2 p.m. with my hands shaking and my heart hammering against my ribs. The space felt deliberately intimidating, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and Judge Margaret Hoffman presiding from behind a massive bench that made everyone below look small and insignificant. Rick sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she charged more per hour than I made in a month. He'd cleaned up for court, pressed shirt, fresh shave, the picture of a concerned citizen trying to protect a child. When he saw me, he gave me a look of such calculated sympathy that I wanted to scream. Patricia squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats. Remember, answer only what's asked. Don't elaborate. Don't get emotional. Rick's attorney, who introduced herself as Ms. Blackwell, stood up first. Her opening statement was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as concern. Your Honor, my client Mr. Morrison has watched with growing alarm as his tenant Ms. Rodriguez has exhibited increasingly erratic and paranoid behavior that places her 6-year-old daughter at risk. Over the past 2 weeks, Ms. Rodriguez has filed dozens of harassing complaints against my client, stalked his other tenants, made threatening phone calls to city officials, and created such a disruptive environment that other residents fear for their safety. She walked the judge through Rick's version of events, the legitimate business visit to collect rent that I'd mischaracterized as harassment, the property inspection that I'd obstructed through paranoid accusations, and my subsequent campaign of retaliation through false reports to city agencies. Ms. Rodriguez has become fixated on elaborate conspiracy theories involving my client, city officials, and Child Protective Services, Blackwell continued. This paranoid ideation, combined with her inability to maintain stable housing and her documented history of domestic disturbances, creates an unsafe environment for the child. She presented their evidence, copies of all my complaint filings, making them look obsessive rather than thorough, photos Rick's fake inspector had taken of my apartment, highlighting every minor flaw, police reports from the night Rick brought his thugs to my door, carefully worded to suggest I was the source of the disturbance. Judge Hoffman listened impassively, making notes. When Blackwell finished, she looked at Patricia. Ms. Williams? Patricia stood, and I could see her hands were steady even if mine weren't. Your Honor, Ms. Rodriguez is the victim of a systematic harassment campaign by her landlord, who has a documented history of targeting single mothers who reject his inappropriate advances. She tried to present our evidence, Sarah Martinez's documentation, the housing violations, the pattern of corruption, but Ms. Blackwell objected at every turn. Hearsay, Your Honor. Irrelevant to the custody question. Unsubstantiated accusations. Judge Hoffman sustained most of the objections. Our carefully gathered evidence was being excluded piece by piece, leaving only Rick's narrative intact. Then Ms. Blackwell called her first witness, Tom Bradley from Child Protective Services. I nearly fell out of my chair. The man who'd been taking bribes from Rick, who'd fast-tracked false investigations against his tenants, was walking into court to testify about my fitness as a mother. Despite his supposed leave of absence, here he was, looking official and concerned. Mr. Bradley, in your professional opinion, what concerns do you have about Ms. Rodriguez's care of her daughter? Bradley's testimony was devastating. He described my hostile and uncooperative attitude during the CPS investigation, my paranoid accusations about corruption within his department, and my escalating pattern of blame shifting and reality distortion. In my 15 years of child welfare work, he said solemnly, I've learned to recognize the signs of a parent in crisis. Ms. Rodriguez exhibits classic symptoms of persecution complex and paranoid ideation. She's created elaborate fantasies about conspiracies targeting her rather than addressing the legitimate concerns about her parenting. Patricia cross-examined him, but without being able to mention his corrupt relationship with Rick, her questions seemed pointless. Bradley deflected everything with professional sympathy and bureaucratic doublespeak. As I watched this corrupt official testify about my mental health while the judge nodded along, I realized Rick's plan was working perfectly. He'd weaponized the very system meant to protect children, turning it into a tool to destroy me. And sitting in that courtroom, watching my daughter's future being decided by lies and corruption, I understood that even when Amanda Chen's story aired tonight, even when Rick's empire came crashing down, it might be too late. The system he'd corrupted was about to give him exactly what he wanted, my daughter. Then Patricia called me to the stand, and I knew this was my last chance to save Emma. Ms. Rodriguez, please tell the court about your relationship with your daughter, Patricia began. I looked directly at Judge Hoffman, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma is everything to me. I work 2 jobs to keep us in a good school district. I've never missed a parent-teacher conference, never been late for pickup, never left her unsupervised. She's happy, healthy, and thriving. And what happened on Thanksgiving night when Mr. Morrison came to collect rent? Ms. Blackwell objected immediately. Relevance, Your Honor. Overruled. The witness may answer. I took a breath and told the truth. Mr. Morrison came to my apartment intoxicated. He made inappropriate physical advances and suggested I could work out my rent payment in other ways. When I refused and asked him to leave, he became angry and threatened to make me regret it. Objection. Hearsay and unsubstantiated allegations. Your Honor, Patricia said, this goes directly to Mr. Morrison's motivation for filing these reports. Judge Hoffman looked thoughtful. I'll allow it, but keep it brief. I continued, describing the escalating harassment, but Ms. Blackwell's constant objections made my testimony sound choppy and unreliable. Every time I tried to explain the bigger picture, I was cut off. Then came Ms. Blackwell's cross-examination, and I realized I was walking into a carefully laid trap. Ms. Rodriguez, you filed 17 separate complaints against my client in the past week, is that correct? I documented housing code violations across his properties. Please answer yes or no. 17 complaints? Yes, but... And you contacted multiple other tenants, asking them questions about their landlord? I was gathering information about a pattern of... Yes or no, Ms. Rodriguez. Patricia objected, but the damage was being done. Every answer made me sound obsessive. You called the housing department and told them, and I quote, heads will roll if this corruption isn't exposed, didn't you? My heart sank. They'd recorded my calls. I said there needed to be accountability. You threatened city officials, yes or no? I demanded justice for his victims. Moved to strike as non-responsive, Your Honor. Judge Hoffman nodded. The witness will answer yes or no. Ms. Blackwell smiled coldly. Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you've created an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid taking responsibility for your own housing violations? That's not. Isn't it true that rather than address the legitimate concerns Child Protective Services raised about your parenting, you've chosen to attack everyone involved? Mr. Morrison filed false reports because I rejected his sexual advances. Your Honor, moved to strike the outburst. I was losing control, doing exactly what Patricia had warned me not to do. But watching Tom Bradley lie under oath, seeing Rick's smug expression, knowing that Emma was about to be torn away from me, it was too much. Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Blackwell continued, do you really expect this court to believe that a landlord, multiple city officials, and Child Protective Services have all conspired against you personally? Put like that, it sounded insane. Even though it was true, even though I had evidence, the way she framed it made me sound delusional. The evidence will show. What evidence? 17 vindictive complaints? Recordings of you threatening officials? Photos of housing violations that you could have staged yourself? Objection. Patricia stood up. Counsel is arguing, not questioning. Sustained. Ms. Blackwell, ask questions. But the damage was done. I could see it in Judge Hoffman's expression, doubt, concern, the growing belief that maybe I was exactly what Rick claimed, an unstable mother having a breakdown. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I caught sight of Emma through the courtroom window. She was still playing on the playground, completely trusting that Mommy would come get her soon. I might have just lost her forever. Judge Hoffman called a 15-minute recess, and I stumbled out of the courtroom feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Patricia grabbed my arm, steering me toward a quiet corner of the hallway. That was brutal, but it's not over, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. We still have closing arguments. Through the courthouse windows, I could see Emma on the playground, spinning on the merry-go-round with Mrs. Patterson pushing her. She looked so small, so trusting. In 10 minutes, I'd have to go back in there and watch a judge decide whether she'd be sleeping in her own bed tonight or in some foster home. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen, story goes live in 3 hours. Federal agents standing by to execute warrants immediately after broadcast. Hold on. 3 hours. The hearing would be over in 30 minutes, and Emma's fate would be sealed long before the truth came out on the evening news. Ms. Rodriguez? A voice behind me made me turn. It was Sophia from 3B, holding her toddler Miguel and looking nervous. I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to tell someone what happened this morning. Patricia stepped closer, sensing this might be important. Mr. Morrison came to my apartment again, Sophia continued quietly. He was different this time, angry, desperate. He offered me 3 months free rent if I'd come to court today and testify that you've been harassing me and acting crazy. My heart stopped. What did you tell him? I said I barely knew you, that I'd only met you once. Then he got really upset and said if I didn't help him, I'd end up just like you, losing my son, getting evicted, having my life destroyed. Sophia shifted Miguel to her other hip. That's when I realized he was admitting to destroying your life on purpose. Patricia was already pulling out her recorder. Would you be willing to repeat that statement in court? I have to protect Miguel. If Mr. Morrison finds out I testified against him. Sophia, I said gently, if Rick gets away with this, you'll be next. He targets single mothers specifically because we're vulnerable. Today it's me, but tomorrow it'll be you. She looked down at Miguel, then back at me with resolve hardening in her eyes. What do I need to do? When court reconvened, Patricia stood up with barely contained excitement. Your Honor, we have new testimony that directly contradicts the petitioner's claims. Ms. Blackwell objected immediately. This witness isn't on our list, Your Honor. This is trial by ambush. Your Honor, Patricia replied, this witness has information about statements Mr. Morrison made this morning that go directly to his credibility and motivation. Judge Hoffman looked intrigued despite herself. I'll allow brief testimony. Sophia took the stand nervously, but her voice grew stronger as she described Rick's visit. When she got to his admission about destroying my life, the entire courtroom went silent. And what exactly did Mr. Morrison say about Ms. Rodriguez? Patricia asked. He said if I didn't help him, I'd end up just like her, losing my son, getting evicted, having my life destroyed. When I asked what he meant, he said he'd made sure the authorities knew she was an unfit mother who couldn't provide stable housing. I watched Rick's face go pale, then red with fury. Ms. Blackwell was whispering urgently in his ear, probably telling him to stay quiet, but he was visibly losing control. He said he'd done it before with other tenants who caused problems, Sophia continued. That he knew how to handle difficult women. That's when Rick snapped. She's lying, he shouted, jumping to his feet. That little bitch is working with Maria too. Mr. Morrison. Judge Hoffman's gavel cracked like a gunshot. You will remain silent or be removed from this courtroom. But Rick was past listening. You want to know the truth? Maria Rodriguez is a stuck-up whore who thinks she's too good to show appreciation to her landlord. I tried to work with her, tried to be reasonable, but she wants to play hardball. Ms. Blackwell was pulling on his arm, desperately trying to get him to sit down and shut up, but years of unchallenged power and corruption had left Rick unable to handle real consequences. I own half the city officials in this room, he continued ranting. That little girl would be better off anywhere than with a mother who. Bailiff. Judge Hoffman's voice cut through his tirade like a blade. As the bailiff moved toward Rick, I saw something shift in Judge Hoffman's expression. The careful judicial neutrality was gone, replaced by the cold fury of someone who just witnessed a complete mask slip in her courtroom. Rick had just confessed to everything, the sexual harassment, the corrupt officials, the systematic campaign to destroy me. And he'd done it under oath, in front of a judge who now knew exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. The bailiff was moving toward Rick when my phone started buzzing frantically in my purse. Then Patricia's phone. Then every phone in the courtroom seemed to be going off at once. Judge Hoffman banged her gavel. What is the meaning of this disruption? A court clerk hurried up to the bench, whispering urgently. The judge's expression shifted from annoyance to shock to something approaching disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Hoffman announced, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Something has come to my attention that requires immediate investigation. As people filed out, Patricia grabbed my arm. Check your phone. Now. I pulled it out to find 17 missed calls from Detective Foster and a text that made my blood run cold. Federal agents just arrested Tom Bradley at his home. Wire transfers from Morrison accounts going back 3 years. Your hearing is about to become evidence in a federal corruption case. But that wasn't the worst part. Amanda Chen had sent me a link with a message, had to move story up. This is airing now. I clicked the link and watched in horror as my face filled the screen on Channel 7's emergency news bulletin. Amanda was standing outside the courthouse, our courthouse, reporting live while federal agents swarmed the building. Breaking news tonight, a federal corruption investigation has uncovered a systematic scheme involving illegal housing operations, bribery of city officials, and the weaponization of child protective services against vulnerable tenants. Patricia, I whispered, grabbing her arm. Everyone's going to know. Rick, his lawyers, the judge, they'll all know I'm the one who exposed this. Through the courthouse window, I could see news vans pulling up outside. Federal agents were walking up the front steps, badges visible, looking like they meant business. Rick appeared in the hallway, his face twisted with rage, no longer bothering to hide behind his concerned citizen mask. Ms. Blackwell was frantically trying to get him to leave through a side exit, but he shook her off and started walking straight toward me. You destroyed everything, he hissed, stopping just close enough that I could smell the desperation rolling off him in waves. 15 years I built this operation, and some stuck-up bitch thinks she can bring me down? Patricia stepped between us. Mr. Morrison, you need to step back immediately. But Rick was beyond rational thought now. His empire was collapsing in real time, broadcast on live television, and I was standing right in front of him, the person responsible for it all. You have no idea what you've cost me, he continued, his voice carrying that same dangerous edge from the night he'd brought his thugs to my door. My properties, my contracts, my reputation. Your freedom, I added quietly, watching federal agents through the window as they spoke with courthouse security. That's when I realized the fatal flaw in my perfect plan. Yes, I'd exposed Rick's corruption. Yes, the authorities were finally moving against him. But I'd also cornered a dangerous man with nothing left to lose, and Emma was still outside on that playground. Rick's eyes followed my gaze toward the window, toward the playground where my daughter was spinning on the merry-go-round, completely oblivious to the chaos erupting around us. 15 years, he repeated, but his voice was different now. Calculated. The rage was still there, but it was being channeled into something that made my skin crawl. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Yeah, it's me. Plan B. You know what to do. My blood turned to ice. Plan B. He'd anticipated this possibility. He'd prepared for the moment when his corruption network collapsed. And whatever Plan B was, it involved my daughter. I lunged for my phone and hit Detective Foster's speed dial while running toward the courthouse exit. She answered on the first ring. Maria, where are you? Federal agents are. Rick just made a call about Plan B. Emma's on the playground outside. He's targeting her directly. I burst through the courthouse doors, scanning frantically for Emma's bright purple jacket. She was still on the merry-go-round, but Mrs. Patterson was standing stiffly beside it, looking scared. A man in a baseball cap was talking to her, gesturing toward a white van parked at the curb with its engine running. "Emma!" I screamed, sprinting across the courtyard. The man in the cap turned at my voice, saw me running, and immediately grabbed for Emma. Mrs. Patterson tried to block him, but he shoved her aside. She hit the ground hard as Emma started crying. "Mommy!" Emma reached for me as the man lifted her from the merry-go-round. That's when Federal Agent Rebecca Martinez, who'd been watching the courthouse for the corruption investigation, tackled Rick's accomplice to the ground before he could reach the van. Emma tumbled safely onto the playground mulch as the man went down, Agent Martinez's knee pressed firmly into his back. "Federal Agent!" "Nobody move," she shouted, drawing her weapon as the van's driver threw it in reverse and peeled away from the curb. I reached Emma and pulled her into my arms, both of us shaking. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. You're safe." Behind us, I heard the distinctive sound of handcuffs clicking. Rick Morrison was being arrested on the courthouse steps, his face a mask of rage and disbelief as agents read him his rights. Ms. Blackwell was nowhere to be seen, probably already calculating how to distance herself from this disaster. Mrs. Patterson limped over, looking shaken but determined. "Are you both all right?" Before I could answer, Judge Hoffman appeared in the courthouse doorway with Patricia beside her. The judge looked like she'd aged 5 years in 30 minutes. "Ms. Rodriguez, in light of the federal investigation that has just come to light, and Mr. Morrison's outburst in my courtroom, I'm dismissing this custody petition immediately. The evidence suggests this was filed in bad faith as part of a systematic harassment campaign." Patricia was grinning so hard I thought her face might crack. "Your Honor, we'd also like to request a restraining order against Mr. Morrison." "Already granted," Judge Hoffman replied. "And Ms. Rodriguez? I owe you an apology. You were telling the truth about a very sophisticated corruption network, and this court nearly became another tool in your abuser's arsenal." 6 months later, I was sitting in Amanda Chen's studio for a follow-up interview, watching her shuffle through notes about the massive federal investigation that had grown from my single complaint into the largest municipal corruption case in the city's history. 17 properties seized, 8 city officials indicted, and Rick Morrison facing 47 federal charges including conspiracy, racketeering, and attempted kidnapping, she read from her notes. Tom Bradley at CPS has already pled guilty and is cooperating with prosecutors. "What about the other tenants?" I asked. "Safe housing, rent forgiveness, and several are joining the class action lawsuit your attorney filed. Sophia Martinez," she smiled at the name coincidence, "is actually training to become a tenant rights advocate." Through the studio window, I could see Emma in the waiting room, doing homework with her new tutor. She was thriving now, sleeping through the night again, laughing more, no longer asking if the mean man was coming back. "Any regrets about how you handled things?" Amanda asked. I thought about that question for a long moment, remembering the terror of almost losing Emma, the weeks of harassment and threats, the moment I decided to fight back instead of just enduring it. "Rick Morrison spent years perfecting a system to prey on vulnerable women because he thought we were powerless," I said finally. "But he forgot something important. We're not powerless when we're armed with the truth." The red light on the camera blinked off, but Amanda kept recording. "And Rick Morrison himself?" "Sentenced to 12 years federal prison," I smiled. "Turns out judges don't appreciate attempted kidnapping in their courthouses." Emma looked up from her homework through the studio window and waved at me, safe and happy and home where she belonged. Justice, it turned out, was the best revenge of all.